Oh, hey, I was just checking out some tweets for W200, hashtag EDUC W200. Keep those tweets coming. I'm really excited about what you're kind of posting. This week we're going to be talking about standards for week 2. And why do we really need academic standards? Well, the main reason why we need them is we need to make sure what are all teachers teaching, making sure that all the different grade levels are all teaching the same thing. Making sure that the students that leave my class and my first grade class are the same as my next door neighbor who's also a first grade teacher. Making sure everyone is meeting at least the bare minimum of here's what you need to know in order to pass first grade, or here's what you need to know in order to pass 9th grade biology. The other clear thing is we also need to be able to measure what they know, right? So that's another reason why we need to have those academic standards. The big thing that I want to point out is right here, which is whatever state decides students will learn, each school has to prove that their students are learning it. So that's a really important thing because different states do have different standards depending on where you are. And so if the state of Indiana says, here's all the things that students need to learn, each school is then responsible for making sure that every single student meets that particular standard before they go on to the next grade. So that's an important thing. So what are standards and why should we care? Well, here's some great links right here. So the first one is to the Indiana Academic Standards. So students have to meet these academic standards, like I said before. In order to go on to the next grade, they have to have a particular standard that they need to meet. So Indiana has their own academic standards, and this changed from the Common Core standards in 2014. So this is really important, again, because Indiana has their own standards. Depending on if you're going to teach in Indiana, you need to know these particular standards, and you need to know that they're different than other teachers in other states. Again, that's important, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. No Child Left Behind was the first federal, law that was taken on. And this one was really very restrictive. It said that schools would actually be graded on A through F. And the way that they did that was, let's say that your 4th graders in 2013 scored relatively well. Maybe let's say that they did an 80% on their English language arts. But then the next year, your next group of 4th graders scored at a 76%. Let's say that that group of students maybe just wasn't as bright as your students before. Well, that actually lowers your grade as a school. So you would have gotten a lower grade. Now, if your students would have achieved more, so let's say in 2013, 80% of your 4th grade students did English language arts and they performed it at 80%, and then your next group of 4th graders performed at 85%, then your grade went up. So it really wasn't necessarily reliable, and they didn't feel like it really was representative of where the school was at or what the school was able to do. So Every Student Succeeds Act is a new act that's been put into place by Congress and by the President, by the current President Obama. And so this is a new one, and the federal government comes up with regulations, and then the state is responsible for saying, here's how we're going to meet those regulations. So the federal government requires that all students have testing in reading and math, grades 3 through 8, and that they're also tested in reading and math at least one time during high school, but it's up to the state how they want to do that. They also require the state to break down the data for each individual school. So to say, here's this one high school, how are they doing? Here's another high school, how are they doing? To make sure that schools are recognizing if one school is maybe weaker than the other school. They also require schools to break down into different subgroups, like the English as a second language, so seeing what are these students doing, how are they doing when we're testing them in reading and math. Our students with special needs, also looking at minorities, and then students in terms of poverty with their free and reduced lunch. So trying to figure out, are any of these subgroups not being addressed, or are they much lower than the other areas? And if they are, then what are you going to do about that? Then they also want to know how the states are going to set their particular goals, and what are they going to hold schools or districts accountable for. So what are the goals? What are the standards? What are you trying to follow? And then how are they actually going to evaluate that? It comes down to the accountability. So they could do it by test results. That's required for accountability, but they have to include at least one other factor. And this could be looking at things like attendance, teacher satisfaction, teacher evaluations, even student satisfactions. So there are a lot of different tests or a lot of different measures that you could use to do accountability, and that's up to each individual state to figure out how they want to do that. Now, the state also needs to specify how they're going to intervene if there are low-performing, with all the low-performing schools. So the bottom 5% of schools, and then high schools with really high dropout rates, those need to, each state needs to talk about what they're going to do in that situation. How are they going to support them? How are they going to intervene with those? So this was a map of the Common Core standards, something I was talking about before. All of the states that are in green are following Common Core standards, which means the standards in California are the same as the ones in Nevada, the same as the ones in Idaho. So they all follow the same standards and they all have similar resources, right? So a California teacher could take resources from a Colorado teacher and be able to use those in her classroom. Now you'll notice that the yellow states, they have their own standards, meaning that Indiana, our poor little Indiana over here, is all by itself and it has its own standards and own resources. But don't worry, we have some great resources available to us. They're right down here at this Indiana Academic Standards Resource Hub. And we also have a ton of resources that teachers have created on Amazon Inspire. So that's a new thing that we've done in terms of technology. So technology can actually help us adjust those shift and make sure that we target the Indiana academic standards. So again, the standards outline what students need to be able to understand and what they need to be able to do, and the technology can be used to help us find resources and also support our students with different games, different links, different web quests, different activities, a lot of different things that we have access to because of the technology. So let's talk about the different numbered parts of a standard. Usually the first number in the standard is dedicated to what grade level it is. However, certain things like world history or maybe like journalism, they don't have a grade level necessarily associated with it. So instead they might have the initials there for that. The second number is the set. So the second set here is scientific thinking for science. And then the last one is which standard within that set, which standard within that category. So this is the sixth standard in the second set, which is scientific thinking in third grade science. And so the students, after the end of third grade, have to be able to make sketches and write descriptions to aid in explaining procedures and ideas, right? Totally makes sense. So what do the standards look like in your area? I want you to go ahead and click on the Indiana Academic Standards, kind of explore it. What you'll do is you'll be able to see different links to it. You can see different standards. Sometimes they have examples in there. Sometimes they have links to resources at the bottom of that particular page. So really explore this page. If you're planning on teaching in Indiana, this is important for you to do. If you're planning on teaching somewhere else, I want you to look at the Common Core standards and kind of experiment with those. And what I have here is I have a Symbaloo picture. Anytime that you see this Symbaloo link, I want you to click on it and add the link to your Symbaloo. So I want you to, right now, open up your Symbaloo and go to the Indiana Academic Standards webpage and add that link to your Symbaloo. If you want to do Common Core instead, then you can do Common Core. So what are your responsibilities? Again, as a teacher, you have to make sure that every single one of your student is meeting those particular standards in order for them to move on. That's an important thing that you need to do. Again, making sure that Susie is just as well off as Johnny, that they've all met at least that baseline standard is something that's critically important. But one of the other things that you need to do is you need to document that they're actually doing it. How do I know that my students are able to write procedures or draw images like the third grade science? How do I know that? So technology tools can actually capture this, so they can take pictures of their work, they can do screencasts of their work, documenting how they're doing different ideas. So technology can also help you to document what they're doing and show that, yes, students actually know how to do this standard. We're going to show you some of these different tools along the way in W200. And then what's the relationship between technology and standards? Well, there are actually standards too that show that your students have to meet in terms of technology. So students need to know how to work basic programs. Students need to know how to do basic troubleshooting. All of these things are things that students need to do, and even in the state of Indiana, we've just approved standards for K through 8 computer science, which are actually embedded into the science standards. So it's important, regardless of what state you're going to be in, you are also responsible for preparing your students to be able to use technology in a way that will help them function as 21st century individuals. And this is really what W200 is all about. So administrators, parents, students, they all have expectations for you to use technology. And within the state of Indiana, we have 169 different districts right now that have one-to-one tablet or laptop initiatives within their district. So more likely than not, you will probably be dealing with technology on a regular basis in your future classroom. So what I want you to do, your assignment for this particular week, for this class prep, is I want you to visit the standards page. You can, again, do Common Core or the Indiana State Standards, whichever one is going to better suit your needs, and find a standard in your particular grade level or subject area. Then I want you to create a list of all of the ideas that your students need to know in order to meet that particular standard. So here's one example. We're looking at the Indiana Social Studies Standards. And again, this is the 7th standard in the second set, which is Functions of Government at the 5th grade level. So this one is identify the 3 branches of the United States government and explain the functions of each. And so we're looking at the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches of government. And so here's examples, just taking like very brief notes. And I don't care what it looks like. I don't care. It doesn't have to be fancy by any means. It just needs to show that you have done your due diligence and looked up this information, because we probably don't remember all the different elements of the 3 branches of government or whatever standard you kind of choose to pick. So this one is an example of looking at the national government, the Virginia government, because this is an example for Virginia state, the state of Virginia, and then the local government, what do they do in that area? So this was one example. This is another example that I just picked up offline. So I have different laws, or I have different notes for each particular area, so I understand what these different areas are doing, or even drawing a picture of what the different branches are, so that you understand you have different information, because what you're going to be asked to do when you come to class is you're going to be asked to do a concept map. So we're going to use Inspiration to actually map this out. For those of you that do early education levels, if it's too simple of a concept, I want you to also look at how people are teaching this particular topic so that you understand where the misconceptions may lie. That's week 2 for W200, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in class.